I don't get applauded very often. Thank you. Welcome to the National Arts Club and to our 48th Lifetime Achievement Celebration. Our gathering tonight represents a couple of milestones. One of them is minor. This is the first in-person event the club has held since the COVID pandemic gripped the nation. And it's the first time some new members have ever laid eyes on me, except on Zoom. We've learned to love Zoom, or at least accept it. A second milestone is more important. The club has been giving Lifetime Achievement Awards since 1969. The first one went to Walter Cronkite. For the younger people among you, he worked for CBS. Since then, we have given awards to every kind of journalists, to sports columnist Red Smith, to columnist and novelist Pete Hamill, to business journalists Myron Kandel and Paul Steiger, to movie reviewer Judith Christ, gotcha journalist Mike Wallace, and a long list of New York Times people. From Sidney Schonberg to Max Frankel to Frank Rich to Gay Talese. But as far as I can tell, and here's the milestone, before tonight we have never given our award to a photographer. The oversight seems especially grievous right now as photojournalists dodge bullets and bombs in Ukraine, munitions that are targeted directly at them. Photographers like Lindsay Addario have, at great risk to themselves, had been documenting the human rights violations. Her images of the bombing death of an innocent family who were fleeing the violence, which happened just a few yards from where she was standing, was one of the first proofs that the Russians weren't going to abide by the rules of war. At least two photographers, Time Magazine's Brent Renaud and Fox News' Pierre Zakrzewski, have been killed in the fighting. Let's have a moment of silence to honor their work and that of the other journalists who have died over there. Tonight, we are making up for our negligence of photojournalists by giving our Lifetime Achievement Award to one of the great ones, Chester Higgins Jr. Chester made images for the New York Times for 39 years before retiring in 2014. Chester is not a war photographer. But what he does is just as important. As last year's tribute to him and his work in the New Yorker pointed out, his eye is trained on moments of calm, locating an inherent grace, style, and sublime beauty in the black everyday. Chester, of course, does not take only photos in the African American community. He just came back from Egypt. But he has made no secret of his desire to illuminate black life for the larger world and thereby enhance understanding and amity between the races. So welcome to our celebration of Chester's work. It wouldn't be happening without the hard work of former Silurians president and dinner co-chair, Alan Frank. After he says a few words, he's going to play a video that shows some of Chester's work. And, by the way, you'll be able to buy signed copies of Chester's latest book, Sacred Nile, at that table over there when the dinner's over. You'll also find on the table a stack of applications for membership in the Silurians, in case you're inspired to join our organization, which is now in its 98th year. Alan.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks very much. Welcome, everybody. So glad you're here. It's a great turnout for a wonderful man. And I'm going to press play. We're going to see a 5-minute video that Chester made about his work. Then we're going to quickly hear from two people who have worked with him while you guys eat, because I know, I think I learned this at journalism school, you know how to eat and write and listen all at the same time. Which in the old days it would be smoke too. But so I'm going to hit play, we're going to do that, and then we're going to hear from Sandra Stevenson and Michelle Higgins briefly, and then main course. Then we're going to hear from Dean Baquet and Chester. Here we go.
A camera never lies about the photographer. The ideas and the feelings of the photographer is what is superimposed upon what they see in front of them. Fundamentally, I'm sympathetic to people who find reasons to protest against the status quo. I know the personal price that one pays from standing up against white privilege, from growing up in a very isolated town of 800 people in southeast Alabama. As a child, my early experiences with my grandparents living with us after the house was burned down. My grandfather took it upon himself to enhance the numbers of blacks registered to vote. And his reward for this was one Sunday his house was burned down. The other level is I had a cousin who resisted the local police who was just harassing people. He shot at the police. And as the sheriff was rounding up a posse to hang him, my great uncle helped him escape through the forest, where he was then met by an undertaker who put him in a casket and drove him across the border to Georgia. This appreciation of civil disobedience from the inside, I was able to feel a kindred spirit when I saw it in other people. My work on ACT UP was a kinship. Theirs was a very legitimate demand. At the time, AIDS were just decimating the ranks of so many young people who could have made more contributions to New York society and American society had they lived. The American government was very slow about processing new drugs that could make a difference. The community organized to fight back against this bureaucratic delay. So they decided to use public protests as a way of highlighting their frustration, to bring attention to the crisis that was going on in their community.
Let us celebrate together tonight the end of the last day on which Ed Koch can tell himself that the communities which are being decimated by this epidemic are so weak and so divided among themselves that he can keep serving us this kind of bullshit. Tomorrow morning he will begin to learn the truth.
There was a huge demonstration at City Hall and Brooklyn Bridge. It was not only about City Hall, but it was about blocking the traffic going into Brooklyn Bridge. Their organizers felt the more discomfort you could create and the more disturbance that you could create, then the more uncomfortable people in power would become. People were getting arrested. These people put their bodies on the line. This one particular image that we ran in the paper is a young man who's on the ground. You see the legs of the police who are the oppressive force there to capture him. Even though he's being detained, in his last energy of freedom, he holds up his banner. And his intensity on his face and his feelings, how much is at stake emotionally, speaks to the desperation, the meaning of what they were trying to do, as well as the oppressive vice they had to go through in order to make these statements heard. I think the role of a photojournalist is to try to give a sense to the viewer, the reality that was in front of the camera. It's all about your strength of self and your sense of acceptance and your sense of belonging that I think that really makes a difference. The more I know about myself, the deeper I go into myself, the better I understand people in front of the camera. We make a lot of constructions on our lives that are unnecessary, but we go through it. And I'm interested in seeing how people go through it. I don't judge people. I'm open to them expressing themselves. I give them the visual room to say who they are. I accept them as people. I accept their legitimacy. I accept their agency. My inspiration to create a great image causes me to appear at that particular moment professionally. but I know it's not something that I own. It's something that I'm here to see. And it's their life, and my job is to try to give light to the reality of their life as fair as possible.
Thank you for that, Chester.
I'm Michelle Agins, and I'm still a staff photographer with the New York Times, 33 years. But my time with Chester started long before Chester knew who I was. It was when I was in Chicago and I was running up and down the streets trying to go to Jet Magazine, asking could I get a picture in the paper. And I finally did get a picture in Jet Magazine. And from that point on, other people in the city would say, well, we'll get you other work. So one lady by the name of Ida Lewis has started a magazine, Encore Magazine. And she said, listen, I saw your work, and we want you to do a Black women's writers convention in Chicago at the Roberts showroom. And I said, absolutely, it was my first assignment. And so I did a very good job. And so she said, you know what? You'll be even better when you meet Chester Higgins. And I was like, oh my God. So I went to bed thinking, I gotta meet Chester Higgins. Chester Higgins, Chester Higgins, Chester Higgins. And so about 20 years later, I got brought to the New York Times, 1989, I got brought to the New York Times, and Lord have mercy, I met Chester Higgins. It's like New York City, just like I pictured it. The one thing about Chester is that he's such a leader. When I was nervous about going out into the streets of New York, he said, just be cool. Just be cool. And like he is, he's cool. You know, you'd never see him running it. You know, if he runs into a fire, that he knows how to shoot it cool. A lot of the things we did during when Mandela's time here, I stuck by him because I learned how to move in that circle. It was really just he was mentoring me without mentoring me, just by watching really how he covered things, and because of that, that's why I'm still here. Thank you, Chester.
Chester. So I joined the Times in 2005. And when I walked through the doors of the original building, the real building, I feel like it's a real building to me, with lots of character.
When the men wore bow ties.
When the men wore bow ties. Of course, I was in awe. You know, here I am, this young person coming into such a great institution. And then at some point I land on the assignment desk, the photo assignment desk, because I'm a photo editor. And then I have to assign Chester to stories. And I thought, oh my God, what if I screw up? What if I send him on the wrong assignment? What if he gets mad at me? The pressure was tremendous. But Chester was so gracious and so kind, and I will never forget those days. I will never forget asking you to get up at probably 2 a.m. to go cover a mayoral inauguration down at City Hall in the freezing cold, of course. Why? But I think the most important relationship I have with Chester is now that he's retired and I have left the Times. And I can't tell you how I value the texts that you send of encouragement to keep going, to remind me of why I do what I do as a picture editor, why I enjoy mentoring other photographers like you've mentored me. I just think it's so important, and I'm so glad that you've been a part of my career. I really appreciate you, and I'm so happy that you're getting this honor.
Thank you. Thank you. I know your shirts.
I used to wear Chester Higgins shirts, so I wanted to get so good like him.
I want one. Let's eat dinner, and there'll be more speakers, including Chester himself, after.
For those who don't work in newspapers, I want to start off by telling you about a little mystery that crops up every time a reporter requests a photographer to join them on a story assignment. Who will the photographer be? In my day, when Ruby Washington or Marilyn Yee or Joyce Dopkine or Michelle Higgins or Suzanne DiCillo showed up, you knew you'd be working with someone who has a tender-hearted understanding of whatever ordeal the subject went through. And if Fred Conrad showed up, you knew you were going to get an exacting, artistic professional, someone who quietly takes as much care with a well-deserved, Fred. We have a wonderful photography staff, so I could go on and mention many more names. And if Fred Conrad showed up, you knew you were going to get an exacting, artistic professional, someone who quietly takes as much care with the variety of cameras he wields and the lighting opportunities as Rembrandt did with his brushes and oils. And if it turned out to be Jim Estrin or Angel Franco, you could expect not only...
Angel! Bravo!
Who else? Angel.
Angel,
yeah. And so you could expect not only first-rate images, but an entertaining schmooze fest of a lunch. And if it was Chester Higgins,
yeah.
the photographer we're honoring tonight for his lifetime achievement, you knew you were in for a religious experience. You were working with someone who viewed his job as a calling and the taking of photographs as a sacrament. Chester has always been a man on a spiritual mission, striving to find the humanity, the grace, and the dignity in everyone. When it came to his own people, he felt they were too often shortchanged, depicting it in disparaging ways that were not true to the lives he knew. He made that clear when he joined the Times. As you can read in the current issue of the Silurian newspaper, Abe Rosenthal interviewed him in 1975 for a position at the Times, and he told Abe quite forthrightly, I remember how scared I was talking to Abe, that was pretty brave, that decency, quote, decency, dignity, and virtuous character were lacking in the portraits of my people in the American media. You'll fit right in, he was told. Chester not only corrected that failure in the indelible photographs he took, but he also raised the consciousness of the entire newsroom in thinking about how they reported on and depicted Black Americans and other minorities. Just look at the photos of Joyce Dinkins adjusting her husband's tie before his inauguration as mayor, or Amiri Baraka jitterbugging with Maya Angelou at Harlem's Schomburg Center. As Mike Serrell, our president, said, Chester gave his readers an intimate knowledge of how Black lives are lived. As a photographer, Chester was also interested in learning, exploring, and discovering more about his roots and the heritage of Black Americans. He repeatedly traveled to Africa, 44 trips in all, from Egypt to Ethiopia to Sudan, Somalia, and he produced 3 vivid, sometimes enchanting, sometimes heartbreaking books of photographs. So for all that accomplishment, Chester, we're glad that the Silurians have named you this year's recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award.
The last tribute to Chester of the evening will be delivered by his former boss. The New York Times executive editor, Dean Baquet.
Thank you for this chance to be part of the celebration of Chester Higgins and his career. He is an immensely important journalist and, in fact, unlike some of us who claim to be this, actually an artist. All journalists like to think that our time in the craft left some imprint on our newsrooms and the wider world. we succeed more or less. Chester Higgins succeeded perhaps the most. He brought people into our pages who would never have been there, people whose worlds would have been largely invisible to readers of the Times. In that way, he changed the institution and he changed journalism. There are many iconic Higgins photographs in our archives and, in fact, in New York art galleries. But a description from his final interview upon his retirement from the paper in 2014 captures the joy and the artistry of his work. It is a picture of Amiri Baraka dancing with Maya Angelou at the Schomburg Center. It's a picture of pure joy and two towering figures enjoying each other in the moment in a way you rarely see in newspapers. For that work, and for all of his work, I'd like to thank Chester on behalf of generations of Times writers, editors, photographers, and a generation of journalists in news organizations everywhere. Thank you, my friend.
Before we let Chester speak, we have a plaque. The Silurians Press Club, Lifetime Achievement Award, Chester Higgins Jr., for his groundbreaking work as photographer, newsman, teacher, and artist. During his 39 years at the New York Times, he shattered racial stereotypes while covering the civil rights movement and countless other stories with fresh insight and steadfast courage. With his impeccable eye, command of light, framing, and extraordinary sensitivity, he portrayed his subjects by illuminating their character and heart. Indefatigably, I did that. He continues to enrich his distinguished newspaper work with freelance photography, books, and exhibitions chronicling the Americas and Africa. March 24th, 2022.
We have to take a picture with the award.
All right.
Okay. That's right.
Okay. There we go.
Great. That's it. Thank you.
Wow. I never pictured it before. I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much for coming out to be a part of this. And I like to acknowledge a couple people before I go further. The man who taught me visual linguistics was a man by the name of Arthur Rothstein, who was head of photography at Look magazine. And blessings on his memory. His daughter is here, Anne Rothstein Sigan. And I also must thank a wonderful writer that's been in my life for 39 years now, because one day in Brooklyn I had this assignment. It was an assignment for a half-price theater ticket booth on Fulton Street. And nobody was there buying any tickets. So it was an assignment that I knew was not going to get into the paper, so I racked my brain to say, well, what else is happening that I could possibly photograph that could get me into the paper? And I thought about the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, and I know nothing about plants. So I did the typical New York Times thing. I went and called up the public relations department. I said, look, I'm looking for a picture. I don't know what I'm looking at. Can someone come and help me? Show me what's blooming. Is there what's current? So they sent down someone that I wasn't talking to, and they sent down this woman who sort of just floated across in her spirit with this long skirt and big red glasses, and so I was really touched. So we start dating, and she's been a part of my life my wife Betsy. So when we actually started dating, and I travel all the time, I had to find out, well, is she really for me? And the test was, can she travel well? Because a lot of what I do is traveling and living in tents and what have you, and I was quite surprised and happy that she could hang in there. But I have to tell you something that happened to me when I was a young man that haunts me to this day and drives what I do. I was 19 years old. I was a sophomore in college, and I went to have a conversation with my great uncle, who was the caretaker for the cemetery, and who I must admit I love more than my father and his sister, my great aunt Shug, I love more than my mother. And my great uncle, March 4th, bless his memory, lived to die at 108. So I'm talking to my Uncle Phil about trying to make the decisions about life, and he looks at me and he says something that I wasn't quite sure if he was paddling me on my hind side or if he was taking a 2x4 to my forehead. And this is what he said to me, but it changed my life. It focused me. Your father taught me how to see effectively. But my Uncle Phil focused me by saying, it's important that you make a statement in life, or you could very well die undeclared. Now, for a 19-year-old as all 19-year-olds who are full of vim and vigor and mostly ego, it really was it's something that sort of punctured my ego, took all the air out of it, because it said, that whatever you're doing, it does not have to matter. And most people who are in the cemetery, it didn't matter. And it focused me, it gave me a sense of direction that has really haunted me in everything that I do. Please don't do that to your grandchildren. But I'm thankful for that focus, because that focus has been a driving factor in what I do. And I'm also thankful that as a student at Tuskegee, where we did not care about athletics, we cared about rigorous intellectual pursuit, I developed a habit of being able to sleep only 4 hours a day. And I don't know if any of you remember the days of no-dos. So I've always kept that particular cycle throughout, working. My days are filled, yes, with the paper, and then after the paper is filled still with things that I care about and see. But I like to say that the most important thing I've enjoyed about working with the New York Times is this. The New York Times gave me a front row seat to society, that I was able to not only see and experience, but have the responsibility to make a statement about people on all different levels, from the lowest to the highest. And that access was quite amazing, and I tried to make sure that I took advantage of that to its fullest and produced images that met those opportunities. And thank you very much for all of you coming here. And I'd like to say, finally, each of you, I hope you live to be 100. And I hope that I live to be 100 minus a day, so that I would never know that good people like you passed away.
Thank you all. That's the end of our program. One thing you should know is that our own Joe Berger, and the Times is Joe Berger, is the editor of the newsletter, which features a lot about Chester. So you should take that with you and look at it. The books are available over there. It's a $50 book for $30. For those of you who are Silurians and haven't paid your 2022 dues, cough it up. And also for you Silurians, we've scheduled, you may not have seen the email, a fabulous program on Ukraine for March 30th, which is not our usual third Wednesday of the month, featuring Jim Brooke, a former Timesman, and a former editor of a newsletter in Ukraine for 6 years, and a Russian journalist who fled just as they were about to arrest him after he circulated a petition opposing the war, which gathered 1 million signatures. So that should be interesting. March 30th at noon. Thank you all for coming.